The EX3203R is a 32-inch 1440p 144Hz curved gaming monitor from BenQ with FreeSync 2 and HDR400. So let's check it out and see if it's a monitor you should consider. The panel is 31.5 inches with a 16:9 aspect ratio and runs at the 1440p resolution, so 2560 by 1440. It's got AMD's FreeSync 2 as well, which basically has some additional features over FreeSync, including HDR support, low frame rate compensation or LFC, and lower input latency. The panel also runs at 144Hz with a 4ms gray to gray response time, so decent for gamers. Now that Nvidia is supporting adaptive sync, it should in theory be possible to use an Nvidia graphics card and not have tearing. However, I believe you'll need to stick to AMD graphics if you want to take advantage of FreeSync 2. I tried using an Nvidia RTX 2060 with latest drivers, but the Nvidia control panel told me it was not validated as G-Sync compatible, which I believe means it may work, but the results aren't guaranteed. I was able to get it working for the most part. Anytime I opened menu settings in Overwatch though, it would briefly black screen, but no issues with gameplay, and it was perfectly fine with AMD graphics. Just to clarify, Nvidia graphics will work perfectly fine for everything else, but adaptive sync might be touchy. I noticed some ghosting with the UFO test. I've recorded this at 180 FPS and slowed it down, so hopefully you can judge for yourself. As you may have noticed, it's got an 1800R curve, which is fairly noticeable, but after using it for a while, I did start to get used to it. This always happens when I swap to curved. I start to prefer that the corners aren't so far away, but it's personal preference. It's also a VA panel, and to me the colours look great with good viewing angles. I couldn't notice any changes even when looking at the screen on sharp angles, and BenQ lists that it's capable of 178-degree viewing angles, both vertically and horizontally. In terms of colour accuracy, BenQ lists that the panel offers 90% of DCI P3 coverage. Unfortunately, my Spider 5 software doesn't test this, but we're looking at 87% of sRGB, 61% of NTSC, and 65% of Adobe RGB based on my own measurements. So not great, but I think acceptable for a gaming monitor. It's got a peak brightness of 400 nits, although in my testing I was only getting 356 in the center with 100% brightness. Likewise, BenQ specify a 3000:1 contrast ratio, and I was seeing 1490:1 at 100% brightness. Higher than what we'd see from an IPS panel, as this is a VA, which are known for good blacks. If I manually maxed out the contrast on the monitor, I was able to get a 407 nit brightness at 100% and a 1700:1 contrast ratio. I'm guessing that the results may be better in HDR mode, but when using that, manual controls are disabled, so I wasn't able to test. The monitor is also VESA Display HDR400 certified, so you are able to use it to view HDR content. In my testing, I did find HDR content to look better compared to SDR, but don't expect anything amazing. In my opinion, HDR400 is pretty low. I guess it's better than not having it at all, but I wouldn't be looking at this purely with HDR in mind. The bezels are fairly thin too, at around 9mm around the sides and top based on my own measurements, and then around 2.3cm down the bottom with a subtle BenQ logo in the center. I've taken a long exposure photo in a dark room as a worst case backlight bleed test. There did appear to be a bit of bleed or glow, which does seem to be more common in curved monitors, but I never noticed it during normal usage, and this will vary between panels. It's not all just about the panel though. Taking a look at the rest of the monitor, it's got a shiny silver plastic V-shaped stand, with a hole in it for cable management. Overall, the stand was solid enough, but there was some movement when bumping my desk card. I wasn't able to remove the stand, but apparently you can use a VESA wall mount transfer kit if you want to mount it, otherwise there's no standard mount out of the box. The rest of the back is a matte silver on top and a textured black plastic down the bottom. Overall, a fairly professional look for a gaming monitor. No flashy RGB lighting or anything like that. The I/O is on the back toward the bottom and faces down. From left to right, there's the power input, 3.5mm audio output, 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, DisplayPort 1.4, 2 USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type-A ports, and USB Type-C port, which can also carry DisplayPort signal. Otherwise on the right, or the left if you're sitting in front of the screen, there's a Kensington lock. On the opposite side, there are 6 dedicated buttons for interacting with the on-screen display, as well as a power button. Overall, I found the OSD pretty easy to navigate. I prefer having buttons underneath rather than around the back or a joystick. There are options for picture-in-picture or picture-by-picture, the usual brightness, contrast, sharpness, and color temperature options, blue light options, and more. As for the included cables, you get an HDMI, full-size DisplayPort to mini DisplayPort, USB Type-C, and 120-watt power brick and cable. So yeah, unfortunately no internal power brick. There are only a couple of adjustments available, -5 to 15 degrees of tilt adjustment, and 0 to 60mm of height adjustment. Unfortunately, there's no pivot or swivel available here. However, I think both of those adjustments are generally less useful for a curved monitor anyway. So far the monitor looks pretty good, but how was it to actually use day to day? I've used a few 1440p 144Hz gaming monitors now, and I think they're a great sweet spot for many games as long as your graphics card is able to run at that resolution with decent frame rates. After getting used to the curve, I was finding that it does help in regards to immersion. And for gaming, I didn't personally have any issues in terms of being able to see the pixels while sitting at a normal distance from the screen, about 60cm or 23 inches away. And that's after coming from my usual 32-inch 4K screen. As for console support, basically PlayStation and Xbox will work no problems. But I don't think either support 1440p at 144Hz. So you might not get what it's capable of. I'm honestly not too sure when it comes to consoles, so you'll have to do your own research. I've also used the monitor to edit a few of my recent videos, and it's worked well. 32 inches is my usual size for video editing, but I usually have a flat 4K screen. While I still personally prefer 4K for that type of work, I had no issues using this, which is honestly a better option if you do both a mixture of content creation and gaming, as you get that 144Hz refresh rate with FreeSync. For updated pricing, check the links in the description, as prices will change over time. At the time of recording, it's going for $600 on Amazon or 750 Australian dollars here in Australia. So what did you guys think about the EX3203R gaming monitor from BenQ? I've been using it for a few weeks now and haven't had any major problems worth calling out. There were a few small things as discussed, like ghosting and bleed, but I didn't find these severe. Overall, the screen looked great and offered a smooth experience with that combination of high refresh rate and FreeSync too. The curve is going to come down to personal preference. Every time I swap over to one of these for testing, it initially feels a bit weird, but I get used to it pretty quick. I end up noticing that it's nicer to have the far corners closer to me compared to a flat screen, especially with a larger 32-inch screen like this. After I swap back to a flat one, the corners always feel out of reach. That's the best I can describe it. Otherwise, the VA panel performed well in games. 144Hz at 1440p is a pretty nice place to be if you've got the GPU power behind it, especially combined with FreeSync. And Adaptive Sync also seemed usable with Nvidia graphics. I wouldn't be getting it solely for HDR, but I guess the option's there and it does make HDR content look a little better. Let me know what you thought of BenQ's EX3203R gaming monitor down in the comments. Leave a like if you found the review useful, and of course subscribe if you want to see more tech videos like this one.